He died screaming under a bruised sky, the mud swallowing his breath, the steel of enemy blades biting through bone like hunger unchained. They struck him not like soldiers striking a king, but like butchers hacking at guilt made flesh. His crown was gone, his name already collapsing beneath the weight of the lies that would outlive him. His naked corpse, mutilated, pierced, abandoned, was thrown into a shallow grave, no wider than the ditch behind a stable, and there he was left, face down in the earth, as if the world itself wanted to forget it had ever raised him up. But the earth remembers. Centuries later, a car reversed unknowingly over the place where a king once rotted. Beneath the soft hum of engines and the casual weight of tires, the twisted skeleton of Richard III waited. His spine curled like a question the world dared not ask, his skull cracked open as if still screaming. History had paved over him quite literally, first with Tudor ink, then with concrete. And when they finally found him, there was no grandeur, no requiem, only forensic gloves, asphalt dust, and silence. This was not just a forgotten king. This was the poetry of irony chiseled into bone. Once painted as the villain of England's bloodiest drama, now reintroduced not through royal fanfare, but through a DNA test and a parking lot ticket stub. What truth lies beneath the surface of our stories? What bones lie under our monuments to modern indifference? He ruled briefly, killed brutally, and was buried anonymously, until the earth itself exhaled and revealed its secret. We build myths on foundations of silence, but what happens when the silence cracks? When the ground gives up what we tried to erase? Was this mere accident or a final act of historical vengeance delivered by pavement and time? How do we bury the truth? Beneath myths or beneath asphalt? Before the bones twisted and the name soured, there was a boy, sharp of mind, loyal of blood. Born into a world where thrones wobbled and trust wore a blade, Richard Plantagenet was not destined to rule. He was the shadow behind his brothers, the quiet strategist with a crooked back and a dangerous memory. But the court loved its brightness, and Richard learned to sharpen his silence into weaponry. At 16, he rode into battle for his brother Edward. Loyal, brutal, and victorious, they called him the Protector of the North, the Last Watchman of York, a blade wrapped in velvet. In the flicker of banners and the echo of drums, he carved out power not with honeyed words, but with loyalty that terrified the disloyal. He married Anne Neville, the daughter of a traitor, and by doing so wove ambition into legitimacy. When Edward IV died, and the boy King Edward V was left behind, it was Richard who stepped forward. Not in treachery, he claimed, but in duty. He wore the protector's cloak and whispered justice. The crowds cheered. The court bowed. The crown came to him like it had always waited. For a brief moment, the kingdom stood still, poised on the edge of promise. They saw not the hunchback, not the whisper of deformity that history would obsess over, but a man of iron will and solemn eyes. He abolished burdensome taxes. He protected the poor. He spoke of reform, of order, of divine right. And yet the air around him always felt cold, a storm unspoken, a silence too composed. Was it wisdom or calculation, justice or the beginning of erasure? In the candlelight of that early reign, Richard glowed, dignified, poised, unstoppable. But light is always cruelest just before it breaks. The world tilted quietly toward the grave, and no one noticed. What if the rise was not a promise, but a trap laid by fate, disguised as a crown? It began with a whisper, a murmur through the stone corridors of the tower, where two young boys played beneath royal banners, Edward and Richard, the sons of a dead king, the rightful heirs. But kingship is a fragile thing, and blood is the easiest thing to spill. Richard, now protector, declared them illegitimate. Bastards, he claimed, born not of royalty, but of sin. The crown shifted from their tiny heads to his, as smoothly as a dagger slides between ribs. The boys were locked in the tower for their safety, and then silence. No funeral, no cries, no bodies, just shadows where princes once laughed. The people wondered, then murmured, then looked away. History calls them the princes in the tower. But what did Richard call them in the silence of his conscience? Obstacles, threats, or reminders? that the crown he now wore may have been bought not in gold but in innocence. The coronation went on. Bells rang, lords cheered, but the echo of tiny footsteps behind stone walls never faded. Whispers thickened into accusations. Was this a king or a usurper with children's blood on his hands? The smile he wore grew tight, his circle thinned, his sleep turned restless. He ruled, but the throne beneath him trembled. For power gained in silence does not forget the screams that were stifled. And history, though blind for a time, eventually listens. What if he truly believed it was for the kingdom's good? That a fractured monarchy needed one strong hand no matter the cost? But that's the thing with necessary evils. Once done, they linger, in tapestries, in bones, in ghosts. He had the crown now, but he had also stepped into something darker, something irreversible. Was this love for country, or the fatal error of believing that justice and ambition could ever share? The same sword. Power does not scream when it begins to die. It whispers, it rusts, it recoils. And Richard, once draped in loyalty and law, began to find rot where trust once stood. The nobles who had once knelt began to glance sideways. The women of court, once silent, began to sew Tudor roses into their sleeves. In every hall, every council chamber, he felt it, the air stiff with unspoken betrayals. The north grew restless, the south turned cold. And across the sea, a quiet exile named Henry Tudor gathered an army, a claim and a grudge centuries old. Richard responded not with fear, but with tightening control. He confiscated land, he buried dissent beneath proclamations. He tried to breathe life into a crown that no longer fit the shape of his sins. The more he clutched the kingdom, the more it slipped. The death of his only son shattered the line of legacy. His wife Anne fell ill. Some said from grief, others from poison, whispered about in alleys by those too afraid to speak her name aloud. When she died, Richard spoke of mourning, yet within weeks, rumors flew that he would wed his niece, Usher, child, Elizabeth of York, the daughter of the brother he had betrayed, the daughter of the woman he had once hunted. Was it political strategy or something more perverse? The court gasped behind their goblets. The church warned, the people recoiled. A king once cloaked in duty now wore the scent of desperation. He prayed louder, he purged his enemies faster, but it was too late. The corridors grew quieter, the throne colder. And far in the west, sails caught wind, carrying Henry, the final storm. Richard had not just lost allies, he had lost narrative. The people no longer feared him. Worse, they no longer believed him. And for kings, unbelief is fatal. What does a man do when the throne he seized begins to see him not as sovereign, but as squatter? When the silence of ghosts grows louder than the cheers of the living? The end did not come in silence. It came with hooves, thunder, and the wet scream of steel on flesh. Bosworth, a battlefield of mud and omen where destiny clashed with desperation. Richard rode into it not as a cornered king, but as a man possessed. Eyes, wild sword drawn, crying for God and England. His horse collapsed beneath him. His crown cracked under the sun, but he charged still, into the heart of Henry's men, into the blade of fate. A horse, my kingdom for a horse, that is what they say, he cried. But what he truly wanted was a second chance. His armor split, his helmet caved. He was surrounded not by subjects, but by silence. His standard-bearer fell beside him. His body was pierced through, once, twice, then again. A halberd tore open his skull, a sword slashed his shoulder, a pike drove into his back, twisting bone from spine. One blade plunged through his buttocks into the bowel, an insult disguised as injury. They did not kill him like a king, they killed him like a warning. And when his breath finally left, the sky did not mourn. The mud accepted him. They stripped him naked, tossed his corpse like meat across a horse's back, legs dangling, blood pooling. No crown, no honor, no hymns. The body of England's monarch, smeared in filth, carried off like a thief in the night. And that was mercy. For what came next was erasure. He was buried quickly, cheaply, forgotten. No tomb, no legacy, just rot beneath stones. His body broken, his name twisted, his memory fed to playwrights and propagandists. And yet, the wounds endured, in books, in whispers, in twisted bones beneath the ground. What is the body of a king when stripped of title, torn by blade, and surrendered to the earth, if not a final sermon on the illusion of invincibility? He died with his face in the mud, crownless, nameless, spine splintered. There was no final word, no righteous defiance, only blood, bubbling where breath should have been, and eyes wide in disbelief that the world had turned so quickly. They hacked at him even after the life had left, carving messages into his flesh, rage into his corpse. His buttocks were split open with a blade, not in battle, but in mockery. For this was not just death, it was ritual. They mutilated the body because they could not mutilate the past. And when the fog lifted and the field fell still, Richard III, King of England, was dragged like refuse to Leicester. No royal procession, no white shroud, just a butchered king dumped into a pit, a hole too small forcing his curved spine sideways, as if even the grave mocked his posture. No prayers were whispered, no bells rang. His name was swept into silence by Tudor winds. A century later, Shakespeare would crown him with words, a poisonous bunch-backed toad, ensuring that the only monument Richard would receive was scorn. They paved roads over his resting place, raised shops and homes and churches, all while the soil below held a secret. His skull caved and broken, his ribs fractured, his hands bound perhaps in his final moment. They say the bones don't lie, but the stories told above them always do. And so he waited, under layers of earth and myth, until strangers, scientists, found him again. Not with reverence but curiosity, and the world looked down quite literally upon a king, a skeleton beneath a car park, a monarch turned artifact, an echo retrieved from the mouth of time. Is there any dignity left in death when even your final rest is borrowed, and your legacy lies in the twisted posture of forgotten bones? The earth closed over him, and so did the record books. The Tudors rewrote what time had not yet spoken. They crowned their enemy in ink, not with laurels, but with horns. Richard the Crooked, Richard the Child Killer, Richard the Deformed, usurper whose very back bent beneath the weight of sin. His name became a stage villain, his deeds sharpened by rumor, not memory. History is written by victors, but in this case it was etched with venom. Plays were performed, portraits defaced, documents destroyed. The princes in the tower were buried twice, once in stone and again in story, their silence pinned to Richard, like a badge of doom. There would be no shrine for him, no pilgrims, no tears, only silence. And that silence was law. For centuries no one searched for the grave. No one spoke of the man who had ruled in blood and died in filth. His bones vanished as his legacy did, swallowed by architecture, lost to time. And yet, truth is patient. In 2012, in the ruins of a friary beneath a parking lot in Leicester, they found him. The curved spine, the battlefield wounds, the DNA. It was him, not a monster, not a myth, but a man, broken, beaten, and buried by convenience. The world gasped, not for his crimes, but for how neatly they had been packaged, for how easily we had believed. A king forgotten so deeply, even his grave had been paved over, not erased by enemies, but ignored by all. What does it say of a civilization when it chooses to forget so completely that only bones and science can resurrect the truth? Time has a strange sense of humor. It strips kings of their robes, myths of their illusions, and leaves behind only what cannot lie: bone, blood, burial. Richard III, the last king of the House of York, died as a villain in public memory, and yet he rises now, not in glory but in question. His skeleton, twisted and pierced, speaks more honestly than the verses written to damn him. The crooked spine they once mocked now resembles a question mark etched by fate itself. What was he? Tyrant or tactician? Murderer or scapegoat? The villain of Tudor propaganda? Or the final tragic pawn in a game of lineage and fear? They buried him without a name. And now, centuries later, they bury him again, this time under layers of apology, documentaries, and cautious revision. In the 2015, he was reinterred with honor. A monarch once thrown into a hole now lies in a cathedral, but what does a solemn ceremony mean when it comes so late? When the damage is already done, when generations have swallowed the lie whole. We told children he was evil, we taught his name with a hiss, and now, under marble and stained glass, we whisper regrets. But history does not rewind. Richard's legacy is not carved in triumph. It is carved in irony. He is the only English king whose remains we've recovered, not by design, by accident, not with reverence, with curiosity. His life was a struggle against deformity, rumor, and fate. His death was a collapse of body, name and lineage, and yet he remains a phantom in our collective memory, haunting both page and pavement. A lesson, a symbol, a warning. Power, once seized, does not guarantee loyalty. Victory is not always just. And the grave is not the end, if the story we tell above it continues to rot. He ruled for barely 2 years, but in death, he has outlived those who condemned him, outlived the playwright who demonized him, outlived the dynasty that erased him. Because myth decays. But truth, no matter how buried, eventually rises. And so we must ask, is Richard's story one of justice or injustice reborn as folklore? Was he the devil we were taught to hate, or a mirror held too close to the crown? What does it mean when a king is remembered not by his deeds, but by his bones beneath a parking lot?